That anxiety you feel when someone does not text back, that tight chest, that compulsive phone checking, that loop of worst-case scenarios running in your head, that is not love. That is your brain's dopamine reward system misfiring in a pattern that is clinically identical to drug withdrawal. Neuroscientists have the scans to prove it. And the difference between those two things, love and withdrawal, may be the most important diagnostic you never learned. In the next 8 minutes, you are going to get a precise, research-backed framework built on attachment theory, dopamine pathway studies, and clinical behavioral markers that lets you diagnose exactly what is happening in your own nervous system when you think you are in love. No philosophy, no vague mindset advice. By the end of this, you will have a single diagnostic question you can apply to any relationship in your life before tonight. Let's get into it. Here is the problem. Most people spend years, sometimes decades, inside relationships that feel intensely emotional and mistake that intensity for depth. The racing heart, the obsessive thinking, the relief when they finally reply, it all registers as proof that this must be love because you have never felt anything this strong. But neuroscience has a different interpretation. Helen Fisher at Rutgers ran fMRI studies on people who described themselves as deeply in love and found that the brain regions lighting up were not primarily empathy or bonding centers. They were the caudate nucleus and the ventral tegmental area, the same reward circuitry activated by cocaine. Intensity is not intimacy. Your brain does not distinguish between the two unless you teach it to. And that distinction is costing people their energy, their time, and in many cases, their careers. Point 1, the dopamine-attachment confusion. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That is a common misunderstanding. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It spikes not when you get the reward, but when you are waiting for it, especially when the reward is unpredictable. This is called variable ratio reinforcement, and it is the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. When someone is inconsistent with you, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes replying in seconds, sometimes going silent for hours, your dopamine system does not register that as a red flag. It registers it as the most compelling stimulus in your environment. Your brain starts organizing around that person the way a gambler organizes around a slot machine. Not because they are extraordinary, because they are unpredictable. Researchers at the University of Michigan found that unpredictable social rewards trigger dopamine responses up to 4 times stronger than consistent ones. 4 times. That means the person who treats you inconsistently is at a purely neurochemical level more addictive than someone who treats you well every day. The concrete example. Think about the last time you felt genuinely obsessed with someone. The chances are high that they were not consistently kind. They were occasionally extraordinary and frequently unavailable. That pattern was not evidence of a deep connection. It was evidence of a dopamine loop. The takeaway, when you feel that obsessive pull towards someone, your first question should not be, do I love them? It should be, are they consistent? If they are not, what you are feeling is pharmacological, not relational. Write that distinction down somewhere you will see it. So here is a number worth sitting with. In peer-reviewed studies, anxious attachment patterns have been linked to a 34% reduction in workplace cognitive performance during periods of relationship stress. Not personal time, work time. This is not just a feelings problem. Point 2, anxious attachment and the cortisol loop. Attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, identifies 3 primary adult attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant. Roughly 20% of the adult population is securely attached. The remaining 80% skews anxious or avoidant. And for the anxiously attached, relationships do not just feel emotionally intense. They trigger a measurable cortisol stress response that the nervous system begins to associate with intimacy itself. Here's what that means in practice. When someone with anxious attachment experiences relational uncertainty, a slow reply, a canceled plan, a slightly distant tone, their cortisol levels spike in the same range documented in people facing acute workplace threats. Their body is reading emotional ambiguity as physical danger. The relief they feel when contact is reestablished is not love being reciprocated. It is cortisol dropping back to baseline. They are not experiencing connection. They are experiencing the temporary removal of stress. Amir Levine and Rachel Heller documented this in their research compiled in the book Attached. Anxiously attached individuals spend an estimated 4 to 8 times more cognitive energy monitoring a partner's signals than securely attached individuals do. That is not devotion. That is hypervigilance. And the brain cannot tell the difference from the inside. The takeaway: if your version of feeling loved is primarily feeling relieved, that is a data point worth examining. Relief is what happens when a threat is removed. Love, at the neurological level, looks quite different, and you will see exactly what it looks like in point 4. And here's what makes this especially difficult to self-diagnose. The brain regions responsible for craving and the brain regions responsible for love overlap almost completely on an fMRI scan. From the inside, they are experientially identical. You cannot feel your way to the answer. You need behavioral markers. Point 3. The 3 behavioral markers of dependency. Because you cannot rely on how something feels, you rely on what it produces. Clinical researchers studying relationship dependency have identified 3 behavioral signatures that distinguish emotional dependency from secure attachment, and you can audit your own patterns against them right now. Marker 1. Presence regulation. In dependency, your emotional state is almost entirely outsourced to another person's availability. When they are reachable, you feel functional. When they are not, your ability to focus, rest, or feel content drops sharply. Secure attachment does not do this. A securely attached person misses their partner but remains emotionally regulated in their absence. Marker 2. Reassurance compulsion. If you find yourself repeatedly seeking confirmation, "Are we okay? Do you still want this? Why are you being quiet?" Not because something genuinely changed, but because your nervous system needs constant verification. That is a compulsive loop, not a communication strategy. Marker 3. Identity erosion. Over time, emotionally dependent individuals report shrinking their preferences, opinions, and social lives to reduce friction with their partner. They stop doing things they loved. They distance from friends. Not because they were asked to, but because their nervous system learned that differentiation feels threatening. The takeaway here is operational. Take one relationship in your life right now and run it through these 3 markers. Not as a judgment, as a diagnostic. Presence regulation, reassurance compulsion, identity erosion. If 2 of the 3 apply, you are looking at dependency architecture, not attachment. And that distinction is entirely fixable, but only once it is named. So back to the original question from the hook. If anxiety is not love, what does love actually look like in the brain? Because here is the thing. Secure love does not feel like what most people raised on romantic media expect it to feel. In fact, most people initially describe it as almost boring. Point 4, and this resolves everything opened at the start, what secure love actually looks like in the brain. When Helen Fisher's team reanalyzed fMRI data from long-term couples who self-reported as securely and happily bonded, not newlyweds, but people averaging 21 years together, the brain activation pattern shifted. The frantic dopamine reward circuits quieted. What lit up instead were regions associated with calm, empathy, and pain suppression. Specifically, the anterior cingulate cortex, the region tied to soothing and emotional regulation, became the dominant activated zone. Translated, secure love does not feel like craving. It feels like calm. It feels like your nervous system lowering its guard, not raising it. It feels like thinking clearly around someone, like not needing to monitor them, like being able to disagree and not feel existentially threatened. This is why it gets mistaken for boredom by people calibrated to dependency. If your baseline has been cortisol spikes and dopamine loops, genuine security feels flat by comparison, because your nervous system has been mistaking dysregulation for passion. Now here is the diagnostic tool promised at the start. One question. After spending time with this person, do you feel more like yourself or less? Not more excited, not more stimulated, more like yourself. Secure attachment is correlated with what psychologists call self-expansion, a sense that the relationship adds to your identity rather than eroding it. Dependency, by contrast, consistently produces self-contraction. More yourself or less? That is the question. And if you are honest with the answer, everything else becomes clear. Here is your comment prompt, and this one is worth actually answering because the data is in the doing. Think about your most significant current or recent relationship. After you spent time with that person, did you consistently feel more like yourself or less? Just drop one word in the comments. Calm or anxious? No explanation needed, but pay attention to what comes up before you type it. If this framework was useful, the next video on this channel goes one layer deeper. It breaks down the exact neuroscience of why avoidant attachment develops and maps the specific childhood conditioning patterns that wire the brain to push away the very connection it needs. It is not a soft feelings conversation. It is a precise mechanistic explanation with a same-day protocol for beginning to rewire the pattern. Subscribe and turn on notifications so it reaches you the moment it publishes. Growth Daily exists for one reason: to give you the research translation that most people only get if they spend 3 years in a graduate psychology program. You do not have that kind of time. So this channel does the reading, runs the synthesis, and delivers the lever that actually moves. See you in the next one.